We'll get them coming this way. A smaller group than the ones we've seen. How do you guys feel? We got some props. What can we expect in the presentation we're about to see?
We're gonna be putting on a great show. I think it's gonna be really fun to watch.
We're definitely going to be taking a different role compared to other presenters. We're going to be commentators for this one.
Now, most of the groups that we've seen haven't had two people. Is this you two are the only two in this group?
Oh yeah.
What kind of challenges has that played in terms of the development?
Quite a bit because he's a sound designer. I'm a programmer, so we're missing a whole lot of roles with like art and UI design, things like that.
And then what kind of feedback are you hoping to get from today?
All good stuff, just pressing forward and winning pretty much.
All right, well, I won't keep you guys any longer. I know that they are ready to get you out there, and I know you guys are probably ready to get this presentation over with. So there you go.
Thank you very
Floor
much.
is yours.
Hey wrestling fans, welcome to BeatTown. I'm your commentator Luke and this is my co-commentator Spencer. Now, BeatTown is a single-player tactics-based wrestling game with the goal of putting on a good show, but we'll get a little more into that later on. In BeatTown, you're going to wrestle villagers and learn their stories to earn exciting new buildings and costumes. The god of wrestling has summoned you to BeatTown after the town has been mysteriously left in shambles. It is up to you to rebuild the town by restoring the faith in wrestling. Rebuilding the town offers new gameplay and narrative developments such as buildings and costumes. Here, we have a little bit of our narrative breakdown with our character stories versus our overarching narrative. Our character stories will expand the characters with further interaction in and outside of the ring and may leave you wondering things like, why is the Lumber Jumbler a werewolf? And our overarching narrative deals more with our wrestling god, with things like, why were you summoned? Are you the first? Spoilers alert, you're not. And why is the faith so important to him?
So when jumping straight into our gameplay, the first turn that we see is from the opponent, the Lumber Jumbler. He telegraphs his move by deciding to charge 3 spaces forward, which then leads us to the Lumber Jumbler's pet wolf. It is now his turn. He telegraphs a bite that is going to hit our partner, which is known as the Raging Cyclone. Now it then goes to the player turns. For player turns, you can select who you would like to move and whose actions you would like to take in any order. So first it is decided to move the Raging Cyclone outside of the telegraphed attack, and then move the main character as well as use his grapple action to throw the Lumber Jumbler into the Raging Cyclone. Now that the Raging Cyclone is able to pin the Lumber Jumbler, you can see that the telegraph move has gone away since he is now in a stunned state, as well as the HP totals have decreased and the height bar on the right has gone up. For the last turn, since there is nobody for the pet wolf to hit, it is now just a whiffed move and nothing is gained or lost. Now you may be wondering what the height meter is, as I said that it increased during gameplay. So what we created is a teeter-totter mechanic known as the height bar. Some moves will increase the height while other moves will decrease the height. Once you reach certain thresholds, which you can see by the icons next to them, you will unlock different parts or different aspects of the match. So once you break through level 1, you will then add the crowd to the match, which can give you passive bonuses, or they can directly interfere by adding objects or items into the match. You will gain your partner or partners, as you saw earlier, and you also gain the ref, which the ref is a passive that kind of turns the tables, and whoever might be the losing side in some matches or in other matches, it may be the crowd's favorite, will then gain passive bonuses from the ref. So for our dialogue mockup, we really wanted to show what it would look like between the main character and some of the villagers when outside of the wrestling. We took a quote directly from a WWE superstar that is said towards Samoa Joe. We included all the grammatical errors, everything. And what we wanted to show is that the goofiness and overtopness of our game is very important. So as we mentioned before, this game is not about winning or losing. It's about putting on a good show. For this specific match and set of objectives that we made, it is between the couple Winifred wife and Henry husband. And what you need to do is you need to essentially be the mediator for the argument and make sure they don't knock each other out. For more specific objectives, what you need to do is keep their HP above 0. You want to make sure that they both use their ultimate moves, which is gained by reaching a certain level of hype. You don't want the crowd to interfere because nobody likes interference in a couple's argument. And you want to have Henry and Winifred make up in the end. So now when looking at our gameplay loop, the big things is the callouts, which we will get to in the next slide, which then leads to a fight of you versus the villagers, and then your village duties, which consist of the rebuilding of the town and talking to the god of wrestling. So for our mock-up of callouts, in a dream-like situation, our main character then decides who he would like to fight the next day. And for this situation, he chooses Joe Stacy. Now, you might recognize Joe Stacy, as we saw him earlier in the gameplay mock-up, as the Raging Cyclone. The Raging Cyclone is known for his grappling moves, as well as his wild style that can help increase hype faster than some other counterparts. Now, another part in the gameplay loop that we addressed was costumes. So thanks to a temporary artist that we have, we are able to see some concept art of what these costumes might look like. You can receive costumes as rewards or also from defeating different opponents and possibly receiving pieces of them. The costumes, what they allow you to do is you can customize your character and give them different move sets. To make sure that the scope is still reachable, we only have 9 characters in our character list, as well as only 1 unique move per character. So now going back to the gameplay loop, we've talked about callouts, costumes, as well as crowd involvement in the gameplay mock-up.
Now, here we are at the meta progression, and we have short-term, medium-term, and long-term events. Our short-term events consist of calling out villagers to fight in the matches and fighting in the matches themselves. Our medium-term consists of the variety of matches that the players will be fighting in, interesting rewards like the buildings and the costumes that the player will receive from the wrestling god, and completing objectives within the match. And for our long term, we have rebuilding and restoring the town and the faith, developing the wrestlers' stories inside and outside of the ring, and figuring out what is the mystery surrounding the god of wrestling. Now, for our unique selling points, combat involves putting on a good show. As we saw with the couple example, it's not always about winning or losing. It's about maybe solving problems around the village. The different costumes altering gameplay. Sam the Rat is not going to have the same attacks and actions as the King of Rumble or even the Lumber Jumbler. Our small-scale tactics gameplay is a 5x5 grid for our arena, which is contrasting to other large-scale tactics games. And our exaggerated wrestling tone keeps the tone light and comedic and really truly captures the essence of wrestling on the screen. And going more with that, our over-the-top design principle is the one we value the most. Strategic is right next to it, but when the two are put together, over-the-top usually comes out on top. Our character-driven narrative and retro-inspired aesthetics also are going to be integral to the gameplay itself. And going further with that, we have our compressed, retro-sounding music and sound effects. It's going to sound straight like it's been ripped off the Super Nintendo or the Game Boy Advance. Our vertical adaptive music not only works with the villagers themselves, but also with the village theme, which will become more musically interesting as the village gets rebuilt and the faith gets restored. And our unique match music, as you heard earlier, is different for each match that you'll be fighting against each wrestler. And the stingers after special actions consider the ultimate attacks like an RKO or a Batista bomb that you're familiar with seeing on wrestling. Now here we have a little bit of our art mock-up from our temporary artist. It kind of goes into how we want our vibe, our color palette, and the stylization of our game to look like.
So now when taking a look at the market, the big one that we wanted to look at was Veneris Tactics. We found this game because it was developed by a single person, which is similar to what we have here, as well as it was a passion project and something that they really wanted to do and put together. WrestleQuest in the Middle is a game that has very similar theming and styling to ours that we kind of take some inspiration from when looking at the sprites. And Into the Breach, as you saw with the gameplay slide, you saw how moves were telegraphed similar to Into the Breach, and they were also just a 2-man team. Although they had FTL first, we hope that we can have at least a fraction of their success. So when looking at our strengths, the biggest strength that we have is the initial completed audio, as well as the strong mechanics foundation. When Luke and I first started this project, we respectively got started on each of our kind of the most part that we were passionate about. Luke got started on the audio, and I started on the mechanics. Ever since Paper Prototype, we've only been building upon that. As far as weaknesses go, it is a very art-heavy game, and since it is just the two of us, we don't really have we're not skilled with art, I'll put it bluntly. So we have been seeking help, however, from temporary artists as well as higher level students who have seen how much passion we have in this project and want to help us. We are also students without money, but that goes for everybody, and who knows, maybe if this gets successful one day we will get some money, but there are lots of opportunities also. We have there are it's an unsatiated market. There are very few small-scale tactics games that have things that are able to be accessed and understood by everybody. Similar to XCOM and things like that, you can see how there are lots of min-maxers, people who really want to push, the numbers to as high as they can go. With us, we are trying to make sure that strategic is important, but the over-the-top tone and just having fun is what's most important. There will also be ample work for any students who join us, and we are very excited to introduce players into the tactics genre that might not be familiar with them. For threats, the wrestling audience might be hard to convince to try to take a turn-based tactics game and try that out, but we know with the characters, as well as respecting all of the culture and all of the years of wrestling that has been going on, we know that we can get them on our side, as well as animation, which is the biggest part in the pipeline. As our professors always says, that is the biggest bottleneck in any game. So we know that our game might be animation heavy, but using pixel art, we know that that can be mainstreamed. So that was our presentation. Thank you very much for listening. Do you have any questions?
That was awesome. Appreciate leaning into it. Yeah, as soon as I saw it, I immediately thought of WrestleQuest. That was I really like that game. Also, I worked on a few wrestling titles. So, I kind of want to go back to a couple of things. So I just want to make sure I got some of this stuff straight. So it seems like, you're in the village. There's a phase where you pick someone to have a match with. And there's reasons why you want to pick who. And then the match, because you had like that husband and wife team. It's like the goal of the match isn't always like beat the other team. The goal, like it's wrestling. It's about like having a good time. So I think that's interesting in terms of progression, where like most tactics games, you're always wanting to win the match. Whereas in this case, you might try to like, okay, I need to do a lot of damage without killing anyone. Am I getting that right? Where each match has a specific objectives like that?
Yes.
Okay.
So the couple arguing was kind of the biggest, I want to say, unique idea that we've had so far, but we've also had ideas such as like there's a few business partners and they want to partner up, but one of them's kind of iffy on the other one. So you need to make him look good in the ring. You got to take the beating. You got to make him look like the hero. You got to play the heel or the villain of the story.
How does a match end? Because the other one, the husband and wife team is like, hey, make sure no one gets KO'd. So like, how does a match end then?
So for the husband and wife one in specific, where it says that they need to make up, what that would be is mainly short little dialogue boxes or bits that would be like, you can see towards the beginning, they're really bitter towards each other, but towards the end, they're like, oh, we've talked out our problems. So it's kind of like a final objective. There's the ones that we had them laid out. So it'd be like progressing through the match, and then the very last one would be like the final objective.
But like mechanically as a player, like what am I doing specifically to get to those points? And like, what am I?
So you'll be sort of putting on a good show for the audience, but when I think of this match, I think of sort of the Asgore fight from Undertale, if you've played that game, where you just keep, for the pacifist route, you just keep sparing Asgore until eventually he lets his guard down, and that's sort of what we're going for here. You'll just keep trying to like have them talk it out and not KO each other, so that they have the opportunity to talk it out, and eventually they'll like settle their differences and they'll let you take them out, kind of thing.
Okay.
So yeah, I really like the humor aspect to this, and then the idea of having these matches that aren't, just pound on each other in a wrestling setting. I think writing is going to be important.
Oh, yes.
And I mean, you've already sort of thought about the art aspects of it, but I think the writing part of it, and then also setting up those unique scenarios, is going to be a big part of making that really hit home.
Yes. In our class right now, we have some writers, and next semester rather, we will be getting more writers coming in. And so we're really excited to tackle those like character stories that are so famous in wrestling for going on and being really entertaining to watch.
So is this I'm gonna ask you about the narrative structure of this, because on one hand, you're showing a picture of like a village. And that's giving me very, Harvest Moon kind of vibes. But then goodness knows, Harvest Moon plus wrestling would be hilarious. But that's also very open-ended, right? Like you can do all sorts of things, and every now and then you go and talk to somebody and so on, and maybe you get a quest or something like that. But on the other hand, your description sounds a little bit more like it's going to be a series of challenges, like every day you have a new challenge coming, like in probably a linear way, or maybe some light branching. So what's your vision for the narrative structure?
So for the narrative structure, the big idea that we had is kind of similar to how wrestling works. There are these large show matches, and then also things that happen all off camera that you just see somebody recording on their phone or something like that. So we wanted to have linear sections of the game. Like you're going to have a match a day, but it is up to the player to decide which match it goes through, and it will still ultimately lead to the objective of rebuilding the town. So if the god of wrestling, let's say you talked with him and you decided that you did want to do the couples tantrum, it would still result in the same building being built when compared to, let's say, the lumber jumbler fight that we had in the beginning. So it kind of almost gives the illusion of choice, but the final objective would still be ultimately the same.
Okay, and are you still going around town and interacting with people in their sort of off time, or is it purely the narrative is purely delivered in those tactics matches?
It would still be there would be like an overworld type setting, and that's where you saw the village, and that would be where you could go around and learn more. It might also, something that we also discussed is like getting tips for the match, where if you know that you're fighting or you're going to have a match with this person and they say something along the lines of, I have a crush on this villager, and you know, oh, she's going to be in the crowd, then allow me to, you know, make you look good, or it might give kind of hints of what the objectives for the match would be.
Cool. Yeah, because that makes me immediately think that if there's going to be interactivity in the overworld, then there needs to be some kind of a reward for the player for doing that, whether it's story bits or some kinds of things that they can pick up, maybe use later, or whether it's resources or story bits or something for them to get out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, first off, who's your favorite wrestler?
So that's a tough question because me personally, it's like I've always been Undertaker fan because his story was just always so wild to me, and every time that I got to see him wrestle, it was like he always outdid his previous introduction by one. But I think also as we are relatively new to being introduced to wrestling, and I think a lot of love has also come from seeing things with like Randy Orton coming back and CM Punk and a lot of those comebacks, and how even years or decades later characters can still come back. So it's hard to pick a favorite right now.
So to kind of bring this to really, it's like how does that love of wrestling, how are you bringing this into the game? Like that kind of what you just talked about, like how does that come through in your game and in the narrative?
I think paying homage to a lot of the either signature story arcs or lines, or I can hand it to you. Yeah. Sorry. Paying homage to a lot of like the signature storylines and arcs, and as well as the moves to kind of show that it might not be called a Batista bomb, but you see that and you're like, I know what that is. As well as obviously we wouldn't get any licensing or anything like that, but having kind of vague ideas of characters put in there, whether it's in the forms of dialogues that is brought up or props or outfits that you can wear.
So something that I was conceptualizing was for the final match, you're going to be fighting against the wrestling god itself, and you're going to be wrestling for the freedom of the village from the tyranny of the wrestling god. And for that, we had planned for like the quote unquote final match for the player is going to be something similar to the Montreal Screwjob, if you know what that is.
I do.
Where the player has to go through the match and they're supposed to come out on top, but then the god of wrestling interferes and ruins it. And so the player goes and challenges the god of wrestling just to one final match.
I kind of want to go hit one other thing. You talked about animation, and I get, is this pixel art?
Mm-hmm.
And you said that was pixel art animation is actually really difficult. It's actually almost easier to animate 3D than pixel art, because pixel art you have to keyframe everything, so every motion is an animator doing every little bit. And especially with wrestling, you've got two characters interacting with each other. Having two characters interact with each other is really, really difficult stuff, but also really important for what you're going to do as a wrestling game. So that's something I'd really keep an eye on. I think that's going to, as your professors have said, that's going to be really, really difficult.
Oh yeah.
So are these matches going to be puzzles with a specific solution that the player needs to meet, or are they going to be set up more as sort of like challenging scenarios where you have multiple solutions?
Originally, we actually wanted it to be the puzzle route, but then we realized that it takes away from a lot of like the freedom that wrestling is. So we want it to be more challenges where you can solve them in multiple different ways. As long as you fulfill whatever the specific objective is, then you'll gain credit for that.
Okay. So I'm glad that you started prototyping already because there's going to be a lot of iteration.
We've already the first match that we had originally on our paper prototype was just beat them down, wrestle like normal match, and quickly we realized with a lot of players like they were like, that was cool, but am I going to do the same thing over and over again? And that's when we were like, okay, add objectives, make them more unique, and that's where like Couples Tantrum, the objectives and everything like that came from.
All right, well, are there any more questions? All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, welcoming our team back. Hey guys, how do you feel?
Oh, great. Super great. I'm pumped.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the feedback. It was awesome.
Was there anything that the experts said that particularly stood out to you?
I think the big thing was, since I said that we didn't have an artist, we knew that animation would be a lot, but the fact that it would be such a big threat is something that we really have to look into.
Oh, yeah.
And you guys have been spending so much time on designing this game. What are you guys going to do now that this Shark Tank is over?
Sleep. Eat.
Sleep, yeah, just relax.
Perfect. Well, I'll let you guys get straight to that.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
guys. And last but certainly